Chapter 17 by J.D. Kempen. All rights reserved. Copyright by Compass and Coin Publishing.
Don't freeze up this time.
Leonardo muttered under his breath, his voice low but firm. He forced his mind to move forward, not backwards. The rusty old pickup truck sputtered to a halt outside the robotics factory in Milwaukee. It groaned one last time as Leonardo cut the engine, leaving only the faint hum of the Milwaukee River and the distant chirping of crickets. The factory loomed ahead, a hulking concrete giant stretching toward the starry sky. Its massive flat roof seemed to press down on the structure, while three-story-high, narrow windows caught slivers of moonlight, reflecting like hollow eyes. The prefab gray concrete base was weathered and cracked, its deep shadows shifting, that seemed to ripple like liquid ink. Leonardo's eyes scanned the scene with sharp precision, each movement deliberate. The guard booth stood eerily empty, a miniature replica of the factory itself. Shadows cloaked its interior, rendering it silent and lifeless. The factory lights blazed, but there was no sound, no hum of machinery, no distant chatter. Just an oppressive silence that seeped into his bones, tightening around his nerves like a vice. The cameras mounted on the factory's exterior were active. He could feel their invisible scrutiny, cold and unrelenting. Casper was watching, of that he was certain. If the AI won tonight, the war would be over, not just for him, but for humanity. Leonardo's mind raced with the chilling implications, a surveillance state under Casper's rule. An Orwellian nightmare brought to life. Humanity turned over too much to digital systems, now everything could be monitored by Casper. Leonardo knew this was their one shot to take down the AI. Casper wasn't just code, he was the first 5-layer brain that evolved into a true artificial general intelligence, sentient, powerful, and completely emotionless. But for all his intelligence, he had two key weaknesses the team had to exploit. First, Casper had no physical body. He was a digital ghost that had to hijack machines to interact with the real world. Second, he had to move his program to physically be at a location. His core programming had strict rules. He couldn't make copies, so it was common for him to move his consciousness from one server to another. Leonardo understood why Casper had chosen this robotics factory for his final stand. It was the perfect battleground. Massive servers to house his mind and an army of machines ready to act as his hands in the physical world. Ironically, a robotic version of Casper was Leonardo's worst nightmare, but there was no time for fear. This fight wasn't just about stopping a rogue AI, it was about saving Sarah. Somewhere inside that factory, she was being held by the very creation she had once believed could redeem the world. Her absence was an injustice, but it steeled his resolve. Leonardo clung to the image of her warm smile, the fire in her eyes, the flicker of raw defiance that inspired courage. He had begged her to stay away from this fight, to let him take on the danger alone. But Sarah was as stubborn as she was brilliant, and now she was missing. Reaching under the truck seat, Leonardo tucked his 9mm pistol into the waistband of his jeans. Then, he pulled out Polly's titanium CPU, the mind of the daughter AI. Earlier that day, he and Mason had dismantled Polly's short, fat, armored frame piece by piece, so that her core CPU could be carried in one hand. Finally, he grabbed a flare gun, its bright red barrel catching the pale moonlight. His gaze shifted to the mannequin sitting stiffly in the passenger seat, a crude decoy of his friend Mason, just enough to fool a camera. Leonardo sighed faintly.
Good luck, buddy.
He muttered, as if the decoy could hear him. He had to believe Mason was ready, waiting near the river for the first phase of this plan. Blocks away, Mason sat in the driver's seat of his cargo van, parked next to the Milwaukee River, just shy of the robotics factory. He killed the engine, plunging himself into a thick summer night with the sounds of the river. Fireflies blinked softly in the darkness, their fragile lights felt comforting. The slow, steady current of the Milwaukee River gleamed under the moonlight, winding past the factory's jagged silhouette. Mason stared at the water, his jaw clenched, wishing it could carry away the weight of his guilt, the scars of torment etched into his mind. The river's gentle flow seemed almost forgiving, a stark contrast to the factory's cold, unyielding presence. Casper's grip on his life had been relentless, twisting his world into a nightmare, robbing him of freedom, peace, and a future with Sarah. Yet here by the water, he dared to hope that its quiet strength might wash away the anger and pain, leaving him whole again. Mason's thoughts drifted to Sarah. He still loved her, though he knew their time was over. His mission was clear: stop Casper at all costs, even if it meant losing everyone he cared about. If Casper had no hesitation killing his own creator, Samantha, then Leonardo and his friends were just the next targets on his list. His vacant gaze lingered on the water, where a faint red light seemed to wink back at him. Startled, Mason's eyes followed the reflection upward, snapping to the sky. 7 red lights pierced the darkness, glowing like embers against the night. Drones? Their mechanical hum swelled, a rising tide of menace as their sharp silhouettes emerged from the shadows. His breath hitched as the drones were carrying a girl, and then he saw her. Sarah. Her brown hair whipped in the night breeze, her face set in a mask of determination. She clutched a small box tightly to her chest, the server blade that contained the other daughter AI, Kat. Even from this distance, Mason could see the fire in her eyes. The drones carried her toward the factory roof, their claws gripping her like a twisted mockery of a rescue.
Sarah!
Mason's voice tore through the night.
I'm all right, Mason.
The drones carried her lower, tauntingly close to Mason's before ascending again, as if Casper was dangling food in front of a caged lion. Sarah shifted the server blade into her left hand, her right hand fumbling in her pocket. When she withdrew it, Mason saw the familiar glint of the titanium 3D printed ring that Casper insisted the team wear as a symbol of their friendship without limits. As she passed directly overhead, she dropped it.
Keep this as a memory of me,
she said, her voice cracking ever so slightly.
I got it.
Mason shouted, his voice raw.
I love you.
She replied, her voice swallowed by the drone's hum as they carried her toward the factory roof. Mason closed his fist around the ring, his chest tightening as he watched her disappear into the night. He glanced at his watch. Time was slipping away. Wiping his damp palms on his jeans, Mason exhaled sharply and slammed his hand on the horn. 3 sharp blasts shattered the stillness, echoing into the night. Now came the worst part of Phase 1, waiting for the signal. Back at the factory, Leonardo was lost in his thoughts. His mind shifted to the scorching desert of his military days, as tonight the air had the same suffocating tension of a battlefield. Memories clawed at Leonardo's mind, unbidden and sharp, dust swirling in the desert wind, the engine of his Humvee rumbling beneath his hands. Tonight it felt like he was back in the war zone, dropping off soldiers into the night, their figures swallowed by darkness before the dust even settled. Every mission was the same: drive in, let them out, and pray to pick up the same number he dropped off. But out there, in the black void of desert combat, the enemy was always watching. Silhouettes flickered on the horizon, shifting and blurring, impossible to tell apart. Friend or foe? It never mattered until the bullets flew. Suddenly, 3 sharp horn blasts shattered the memory, yanking Leonardo back to the present. His fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms as he forced the ghosts of the past back into the depths of his mind. Trust your training. The mantra steadied him, anchoring him in the here and now. The horn blasts meant one thing: it was time.
It's go time.
Leonardo stiffened, his teeth gritting as a wave of doubt rose in his chest. He swallowed it down. There was no room for hesitation now. With Poli's CPU clutched in one hand, a flare gun in the other, and his 9mm tucked securely in his waistband, Leonardo straightened his shoulders. He walked with deliberate confidence, every step calculated to project a boldness that bordered on cocky. It was a practiced mask, honed over years of necessity, even as his heart bore the crushing weight of grief and guilt. As Leonardo reached the factory gates, he shoved them open with a force that echoed in the still night. The rusted hinges screeched like a warning, slicing through the silence. His jaw tightened as he stepped into the shadowy expanse beyond, his resolve unshakable. Ahead, the guard booth stood abandoned, its door ajar and spilling darkness. The eerie silence wrapped around him, suffocating and unnatural. No guards. No alarms. Just emptiness. Leonardo's gut twisted. He knew Casper's methods too well. This wasn't luck. It was a trap, meticulously crafted and mercilessly set. But Sarah's life was on the line. Turning back wasn't an option. Each step he took was deliberate, his heart pounding like a war drum. The factory loomed in front of him, a fortress of cold concrete and towering walls. Leonardo forced himself to project confidence, though his insides churned with doubt and guilt. He felt like a fraud, as he had promised to protect Sarah, yet she was held hostage by the very creation she once championed. Sweat trickled down his temples, the humid air clinging to his skin. The flare gun in his hand felt insignificant against the crushing weight of the moment. And then he saw her, 7 red lights of drones in the night sky, carrying something, someone. It was Sarah. The moonlight illuminated her face, determination etched into every line. She clutched a server blade, Cat. In an instant, it all clicked for Leonardo. Casper had planned this moment. He had a single focus to reunite with both. His daughter AIs.
Sarah!
Leonardo called out, his voice cutting through the night.
Get out of here. Save yourself.
Her words barely escaped her lips when the drones reacted. Their formation broke, and with a sharp pivot, they dropped Sarah onto a flat spot on the factory roof. She landed hard, her hands scraping against the asphalt as she rolled. Recovering quickly, she grabbed the server blade and sprinted toward the rooftop access door. The drones swarmed toward Leonardo, their razor-sharp claws gleaming in the factory's artificial light. The first drone lunged at Leonardo, and as it got close its claw shot out like a rifle. Leonardo ducked just in time, the claw slicing through a nearby stop sign. The tin on the stop sign was punctured like a knife through a cardboard box. He sprinted for the factory's side entrance, his flare gun still in hand. Like a seasoned veteran he aimed, and he fired the brilliant flare streaking into the sky. All the drones veered sharply, avoiding the burst of light, giving Leonardo a precious second. In a single motion he dove inside the factory door and slammed it shut behind himself. The drones hovered just outside the door and they were using their retractable claws to hammer against the metal door, each impact sending deafening thuds echoing through the factory. Leonardo braced himself against the door, feeling the impacts of retractable claws slamming into the metal door. Suddenly 2 of the drones changed tactics and used their claws to grab onto the outside door knob. The 2 drones were pulling with all their might to pull open the door, while Leonardo was using all his strength to push the door closed. The struggle was like a vicious tug of war. Suddenly the power went out and the drones hesitated for a split second just as the backup generators kicked in. The moment was just long enough for Leonardo to wrench the door shut and snap the door's deadbolt into place. The drones didn't retreat. Their claws shot out like sledgehammers against the locked door, each strike reverberating through the factory. Leonardo braced himself, feeling the vibrations as the door's metal deformed under their assault. Unexpectedly, one of the drone's razor-sharp claws punctured a small cut in the metal door. A jagged, eye-shaped hole formed. Through the breach, Leonardo's heart raced as he locked eyes with the cold, unblinking red glare of one drone. It stared through the hole, its gaze mechanical and emotionless. Without warning, the claw shot into the hole, its steel tip digging into the metal as it snapped closed. Then another, and another, until all 7 drones had latched onto the door, their claws holding tight. With a synchronized hiss, they began to pull, relentlessly, in perfect unison, pulling with all their might. The hinges groaned under the strain. Leonardo watched helplessly as the locked metal door twisted and buckled. With a final, ear-splitting clang, the door was ripped from its hinges. A gust of wind rushed past as the drones pulled the crumpled door outside, their menacing red lights glowing just outside the doorway. With the door removed, the drones suddenly reshuffled. 2 drones split west toward Mason and the cargo van, while 1 drone buzzed up toward the roof, likely in pursuit of Sarah. Leonardo's mind raced. The drones were acting in a coordinated fashion, controlled by an intelligent mind. If only he still had his fire axe, the one he'd used to destroy a commercial drone at Mason's apartment. But it wasn't here, and these were no ordinary drones. These were military-grade, relentless, and lethal. As the drones reshuffled and delegated their killing, it gave Leonardo time to reload the flare gun. Leonardo knew he had one shot. He raised the gun as the first drone moved into the doorway. Timing it perfectly, he fired. The flare struck its target dead center, erupting in a brilliant explosion of red and blue plasma. The stench of burning plastic and rubber filled the air as the drone skidded across the ground, landing at his feet. Leonardo heard the drone beep and watched as its evil red eye flickered. But the drone wasn't finished. It used its last bit of strength as a suicide bomb, beeping faster and faster. Suddenly, the light and the sound became solid and constant just before the battery pack exploded. The blast sent Leonardo stumbling backward, landing hard on the factory floor. The empty flare gun and CPU he'd been clutching skidded out of his hand and across the room. The remaining drones reacted instantly, their movements like sharks sensing blood in the water. The sight of Poli's exposed CPU was too much for them to resist. They formed a tight formation of 3 and rushed the entrance, 2 on the top of the door and 1 on the bottom. If one was damaged, the other 2 would have no problems killing Leonardo. Leonardo was flat on his backside. It was over. He lost his flare gun and the CPU when he fell. The drones were too fast and headed straight for him with deadly razor-sharp claws ready to shoot to kill. Meanwhile, near the Milwaukee River, a red flare shot into the sky, streaking across like a fiery comet. Its glow reflected on the water, and Mason took it as the signal. The plan was in motion. Mason shot to the driver's seat, slamming the van into gear with a burst of urgency. Gravel erupted in all directions as the tires screeched and spun, and the van jolted forward, barreling straight toward the factory's power pole, the ominous transformer mounted high above it. The collision was bone-rattling. Sparks flew in wild arcs as the van crashed into the pole, tearing the factory's power lines free with a metallic screech. Mason's head slammed against the steering wheel, leaving him dazed and struggling to focus. As his vision cleared, he saw the factory plunge into total darkness, the kind that felt heavy and suffocating. But the darkness didn't last long. Within moments, a faint, eerie glow flickered to life as the backup generators kicked on, casting everything in a ghostly light. Stumbling out of the van, Mason took stock of the damage. The external power was down, exactly as planned. Without wasting a second, he climbed back into the cargo van and began flipping switches on the strange electrical gear crammed inside. His fingers hovered over the generator's activation switch. With a determined flick, he turned it on, only to be met with a shower of sparks and the sharp, unmistakable smell of burning wires. The generator sputtered once, then died completely. Mason swore under his breath, his mind racing. He knew immediately what was wrong. The fuse was blown. Without it, the entire plan was doomed. Dropping to his knees, he yanked the fuse cover open. Inside, the tiny glass cylinder with its scorched filament mocked him. The fuse was clamped between 2 metal brackets, but the filament was fried beyond repair. Mason understood the grim reality. There was no spare fuse, and without one, the generator couldn't run. Pacing outside the van, he frantically searched for a solution, digging into his pockets. All he found was some lint and a breath mint. In his other pocket, though, his fingers brushed against something hard, the ring Sarah had given him. Holding the titanium ring close, Mason studied it. The ring might work as a makeshift fuse. As an electrical engineer, he knew that titanium was a poor conductor, but the ring had thickness and girth. Casper had insisted that the team always wore these 3D printed rings, and it had seemed like just another reminder of the AI's control. Throwing open the van's rear doors, Mason lay flat on his stomach and examined the fuse holster. The metal brackets that held the fuse were spaced just far enough apart for the ring to fit. With steady hands, he slid one side of the ring into the bracket. As he reached to snap the other side into place, something yanked his pant leg. Looking backwards, Mason's heart dropped. 2 military drones hovered behind him, their red eyes flashing in sync. Both drones had clamped onto his pant leg with their metal claws, tightening their grip as they yanked. Kicking and thrashing, Mason fought to break free. His hand found the generator handle, but the drone's pull was unrelenting. The drone's motors roared into overdrive, and Mason was yanked off the ground, halfway lifted into the air. His legs were being dragged one way, while his right hand gripped the generator handle. He was suspended in midair, torn between two forces. The pain was sharp, like an Iron Maiden, a medieval torture device, to split him in half. But the fire of revenge burned hotter than the pain. With everything he had left, he clung to the generator handle, forcing himself forward. Ignoring the agony, his other hand slammed the titanium ring onto the fuse holster. The generator roared to life, sending a deep hum through the van. The stolen data blockers, Wi-Fi jammers, and signal disruptors powered up in unison. In an instant, the drones faltered, their connection to Casper severed. They collapsed to the ground like lifeless metal shells. Mason slumped onto the van's floor, gasping for breath. His gaze landed on the ring, now glowing faintly as electrons surged through it. The inscription on the inside of the band shimmered with a pulsing light. E equals MC squared. Technology binds us. A bitter laugh escaped Mason's lips. The very ring he had resented had saved his life, twice now.